Hey, hope everybody's doing well. This is Anthony DiBartolo, and I'm here to give you a little bit of a deeper look into my main gig template in Ableton Live. If you're interested at all in live looping and audio effects processing, I think that Ableton is the best bet. It has all the tools necessary to pull it off because it's built for live performance, and it is basically customizable to the infinite degree. The education price is $449 for the full version. It's a little cheaper if you don't splurge for the full version, but it's well worth it. And I say education price, so hint, hint, get it while you're in school because it's double the price for the full version once you don't have access to it. So I wanted to start by kind of giving you a tour of Ableton, and I'm going to go from the basics for those of you who are not familiar with the application, and then I'm going to show you specifics on what I do. This is my gig template, and creating and testing a template in a variety of settings is imperative to success in live performance. And that's basically because a million things can go wrong. There are so many different variables. For instance, room size and shape, the speaker system that you're given, mics that are provided, and a lot of times you don't really even have the option of bringing your own instrument. For instance, if I was to fly out to Minnesota to give this clinic in person, I wouldn't have my marimba that I'm used to recording on, or my vibes, or some other instruments, snare drums, whatever. So there are just a lot of different factors that you have to consider. Again, this is why we need to create and test this template. I can't specify, or I can't say enough why that is important. Okay, so if you're new to Ableton, you'll notice that this view specifically looks a little different than other DAWs. This is called Session View, and this is where you can launch clips that you record either in advance or live. In my current setup, all of what I do is done live, so I don't really use this view very often. Speaking of the clips, under each track that you see, so instrument is my live signal, distortion is the specific track just for my distortion pedals, and the loopers and reverse looper. So underneath each of these tracks, you see that there's a little stop button. If I were to record something that would go there, it would give me the clip underneath for each one, and I can trigger them independently just with the click of a button. So it is useful for DJs, and also like if I were to record something in advance and want to play it back during my live performance and play along to it, that's where I would use that. But since, again, most of my setup is based around live looping, and then the processing of live audio, I don't really use this. So I'm going to hit Tab, and you're going to see that it's going to take me to what's called the arrangement view. And this looks a lot closer to a standard DAW, so Logic or Pro Tools or even GarageBand. So it's kind of this horizontal view going from left to right, beginning of tune, end of tune. We have our main transport controls, so play, stop, and record. There's an automation recording, which is really great because it can capture all the triggering that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then our effects panel is over here. It doesn't really matter, honestly, which one you use during live performance. It's just kind of depends on what you're doing and what your comfort zone is. So I'm going to just kind of stay in arrangement view for now and show you around. So again, I have 5 separate tracks set up. And I chose to do it this way so that, again, I have individualized control over what I'm doing. They do have to be armed. So if my whole setup was plugged in here, I'd be able to click on the record button and it'll turn red. And that means that your track is armed and ready to be played. And that's for both input monitoring and recording. Okay, so for a live performance, I would, even though I'm not recording things, into the arrangement, I still need to arm all 5 of my tracks so that I can hear it in my headphones and that you all could hear it through the speakers. The first is my instrument that obviously is mic'd. So if I click on it, you can see that I have 2 devices. I have an EQ and a compressor. And that's my device chain down here. So basically, the audio first enters the EQ and then would get compressed. This EQ is set to what I know sounds good on most of my instruments in my home studio. But the great thing is that I can also tweak it depending on my performance venue. So you can see it's kind of like at this M shape here. And this is an 8-band EQ, so I can actually set up to 8 kind of shapes. The M, again, is what I'm calling it, kind of works for a lot of keyboard instruments, especially for marimba and vibes. So you can see that my low end is kind of cut down, and that's just because marimba especially has kind of boomier bass. And when you have the pedal down, vibes can also get overbearing as well, especially when we add effects to it. The mid-range, and that's what causes this M shape, is brought down just so that I can reduce a little bit of the harshness that can pop up here. And then you can see that I also am cutting down on some of the high ends, because in general with percussive instruments, we can get a little bit harsh on the higher end of the instrument. Again, I can tweak this for whatever performance I'm in, whatever instrument I'm using, but this is my go-to. Okay, so if you're not familiar with compression, the most basic idea is that it keeps your input volume below a threshold that you set. And that's just so that your sound doesn't distort and you sound a little bit more natural. And that threshold is set by this fader here. And then the output is what actually comes out after the compression. And again, I'm just going over the basics here. So if you want more in-depth on any of these, we could spend an hour just on EQ and compressor. But, if you need more, you can check out Abelton's website or feel free to send me an email. Okay, my second track is for distortion effects only. And for my distortion, I'm actually using the Archetype Abasi plugin. I'm a huge fan of Tosin Abasi and Animals as Leaders. And so I've been experimenting with the distortion patches that Neural DSP created based on his gear. And I've been really digging that. So you'll hear that in my videos that I've presented here as well for all the distortion sounds. I decided to create an individual track here because it allowed me to EQ this effect separately and also apply a noise gate. That basically just keeps the hissing sound down, and that's because we're mic'd. So when you have an open mic, it's not the same as going direct like an electric guitar. And so you can hear a lot of the room sound, because the gain is raised so high when you put distortion on a track. So I use a noise gate for that is set and tweaked specifically for using distortion on these instruments. So that really is affected by the threshold that I have set here. And that's just so that it only opens when I play at a certain decibel. This one also has its own looper so that I can have a looper that is only for distortion lines, and it has its own EQ. I noticed that for marimba and vibes, at least, you can see that my mid and high is actually raised, and then the low gain is just brought down slightly. All right, so the next 3 tracks are for more loopers. And I have 3 more. So I actually am running at any given time up to 4 loopers during my performances. Okay, so looper 1 is just the main instrument sound. So it's basically routed from this first main instrument track. Looper 2 is similar, except I add this pretty cool device here. It's called the Dirty Drum Synthesizer. Yeah. And I actually can do a lot with this. You'll hear it in my 1-minute improv that I'm gonna showcase at the end of this video. And basically, it just allows more sound manipulation. And I have this mapped to one of my MIDI controllers that we're going to talk about in a few. So basically, the device chain on my second looper is whatever I loop here will then go through this dirty drum synthesizer that I can then manipulate the looped feedback. But then I can also just play around with that setting live, not with the loop, but also with my live signal. I have a limiter on this one just because sometimes these crazy effects that come out of the synth sounds get a little bit overbearing. So again, I can just set the ceiling and the gain and all that, and also have its own EQ, mostly just bringing down the low ends. I wanted to have a reverse looper, so actually it plays back whatever my loop is in reverse, and so you can see that it's checked off here. It's really simple, so that if I have it just like this, it would play back exactly how I play it. If I hit reverse, it can do that. And I, again, chose to do it separately because, as you'll hear in my improv Etude 7 video that's part of this clinic, I do a roll that is then looped backwards, and so I like to have it on a separate track so that I have customization over that. Also has its own EQ. The last 2 tracks that we need to check out are my return tracks. So I'm going to just go back for 1 minute to the session view. Okay, so here are my 5 tracks that I just talked about. And then on the right side are my returns. So the return tracks are really important because they are for sends. The first one here contains my pedal board. So if I click in there, you're going to see now my device chain is 2 delays, and then Damien is kind of like a ring modulator, which is another form of manipulation. So this is kind of like my pedal board, like a guitar player stomp box, for instance. The second return track contains my basic reverb that I have tweaked here. So everything here is completely customizable, and this is only one of the reverbs that are available. So if you look under reverb here, there's all different things from hall, room to special, which would be something like replicates a basement, or brighter reflections, frozen build up. All these are different presets that are available, and they're all 100% customizable, which you better believe you're going to want to spend some time with if you're going to get into this stuff, because you want to make it so that it is has your touch on it. Okay, if you use all just presets, then anybody with Ableton could basically recreate what you do. My goal is to make it not reproducible to an extent, just so that I can again put my own individualized touch on my music. Okay, sends are really, really important because it's the only way to route your audio and clean up your mix. Because if you put the effects directly on the track, so for instance, if I were to have this first reverb directly on my live instrument signal, it kind of clouds the actual capture of your instrument. And in turn, you lose control over how much of each of these devices that are heard. Sends allow you to isolate your clean signal so that you can dial in as much of the effects as you want. And that's done by these knobs here. Okay, so A refers to my pedal board, B refers to reverb. So I also do, for instance, route my reverb send onto my looper tracks to make it sound more cohesive to the live sound. So you can kind of see that here. So here's my reverb amount of send, and then here it is for looper 1. Actually a little bit more, just because of when it goes through the other effects, it kind of changes the way you need to use reverb. Looper 2 is a little bit less than that, and you can see my reverse looper, I have way less reverb because I actually want it to be much different sounding than my actual instruments channel. The input channel, that is. All right. So now on to MIDI controllers. I use 2 controllers for my performance setup. A foot controller, which is made by Keith McMillan Instruments, KMI, and it is called the Soft Step 2. That's also, just so that you know, who Pearl collaborated with to make the mallet station. So very reputable MIDI controller designer. And then my mixer is by Novation. It's called the Launch Control XL. The Soft Step basically just acts as a physical pedal board. So when I click into my pedals, basically each button is mapped so that I can turn these on and off with my feet and keep my hands free. It also controls my loopers. And the great thing about Ableton is that most devices are recognized very easily, meaning you can kind of just plug them in without doing too much to them. The Soft Step, you do have to do a little bit of preparation on that one, but that would be for another day's discussion. And everything is MIDI mappable as well. Okay, so devices are recognized easily and everything is MIDI mappable. This is how you MIDI map, okay? And you can actually map to keys or to MIDI. In this case, you want to map to MIDI. So if you click on that, everything that's purple is able to be controlled. And you can see that there's all these little ranges. So you can see everything that I have that's MIDI mapped as of right now. Okay? Even here. So, just because we don't have a million buttons on the controller, you have to be kind of selective. And so basically one of my buttons on the controller, the foot controller, will turn this delay on or off, okay? Or this one on or off, or this one on or off. That's basically how it works. So you just click on it, and then you would click the corresponding button on your device. You hit MIDI, and it's as simple as that. It keeps track of everything too, so you can see where it says MIDI mappings. These are all the things that I have MIDI mapped. So it's pretty amazing what you can do with it. All right. Let's go to the looper for a second and talk about the mini mapping of that. So here's the looper plugin, and this is our multi-purpose transport button. That's what's really important here. And this is also mappable, which really makes for very easy control with your feet. So basically, when you hear me live looping, I'm going to click that first, and the first click goes to record. So like this. See, it says recording in progress. And if I click it again, it goes automatically into overdub mode, which means that my input signal is feeding into it and I'm looping. Then I click the same button again and it's in playback mode. So now it's just playing back what I did, and whatever I play over it won't affect the loop. Okay, then if I double tap on that button, it stops. If I hold it, it clears. And I can do that all with my foot because it's mapped to my pedal. Really important to the setup, just because, again, I can keep my hands free. And as percussionists, we need to keep our hands free as much as possible. All right, so now talking about the launch control, which is my mixer. It's not as important to getting started as the foot controller is, but it's extremely important to my setup, mostly because it allows me to have a piece of hardware under my hands when I need to adjust things like, for instance, the track and send volumes, which would get really tedious if I had to actually do this during a live performance. If I have to click using my trackpad and squint at my screen and do that, it gets really tough. So I decided to invest in this mixer because it can be fully mappable and I have physical knobs and sliders that I can use. So there you have it. I hope this video is helpful to understanding some of Ableton's features and specifically how I make music within it. And I highly encourage you to check it out if you are interested in doing some things with live audio manipulation and live looping, or a combination of both like I do. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to me and check out Ableton's website, maybe even download a free version to try it out and see what you think. All right, cheers. See ya.